The rain fell in slow, heavy drops as Evelyn Hayes stood by her husband's grave, her fingers trembling around the edge of her black coat. The funeral had been a quiet affair. Too quiet. The few mourners who had shown up were already drifting away, their murmured condolences fading into the gray afternoon. Evelyn barely heard them. Her world had narrowed to the polished casket being lowered into the ground, taking with it the man who had been her anchor for 52 years. Beside her, Madison adjusted her designer sunglasses, her posture stiff, her lips pressed into a thin line. Evelyn had hoped her daughter would reach for her hand, offer some warmth, but Madison only checked her watch and sighed. "We should go," she said, her voice clipped. "There's paperwork to finalize." Evelyn nodded numbly, allowing herself to be led to Madison's sleek car. She expected they'd drive back to the house she'd shared with her husband for decades, but instead of turning onto the familiar road, Madison accelerated past the town limits, the buildings shrinking in the rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" Evelyn asked, her voice frail against the hum of the engine. Madison didn't answer. The trees grew thicker, the road lonelier, until the pavement gave way to gravel, then dirt. When the car finally lurched to a stop, there was nothing around them but overgrown fields and the distant cry of a crow. Then Madison turned to her, her eyes cold. "This is where you get out." Evelyn's breath caught. "What?" "The house and the business are mine now," Madison said, as if explaining something simple to a child. She leaned over, popped open the glove compartment, and tossed Evelyn's small handbag onto her lap. Dad's will was very clear. Before Evelyn could protest, Madison reached across her and shoved the car door open. The damp, earthy smell of the countryside rushed in. "Out," she repeated. Evelyn's legs moved without her consent, stepping onto the muddy shoulder. The door slammed shut and the car peeled away, leaving her standing alone in the middle of nowhere, her bag clutched to her chest. For a long moment, she didn't move. The wind tugged at her coat, the reality of what had just happened settling over her like a weight. But then, slowly, her fingers dipped into her pocket, brushing against the edge of a sealed envelope, the one her husband had pressed into her hand the night before he died, his eyes urgent as he whispered, "Don't open. This until you're alone," she exhaled, her grip tightening around it. She wasn't as helpless as Madison thought. The envelope felt heavy in Evelyn's hands, as if it carried more than just paper inside. The sky darkened overhead, threatening more rain, but she couldn't bring herself to move just yet. Her fingers trembled as she carefully broke the seal, unfolding a single sheet of crisp legal paper. At the top, bold letters declared, "Last Will and Testament of Robert Hayes." Her breath hitched. This wasn't the will Madison had waved in her face at the lawyer's office, the one that supposedly left everything to their daughter. This document, notarized just weeks before Robert's death, stated in unmistakable terms that the house, the business, and every asset they owned were to remain Evelyn's, solely hers. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped her lips. Robert had known. He had known what Madison would try to do. Beneath the will was another slip of paper, this one yellowed with age, the edges soft from handling. Robert's handwriting, familiar and steady, filled the page. "Go to 28 Briar Hollow. Ask for Isaac." That was all. No explanation, no reassurance, just an address and a name. Evelyn carefully tucked the papers back into the envelope and slipped it into her coat pocket. She had no phone, no car, and no idea where Briar Hollow was, but standing here wouldn't solve anything. She adjusted the strap of her bag over her shoulder and began walking in the direction Madison's car had disappeared, her sensible shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. The road stretched endlessly, lined by skeletal trees and the occasional rusted fence post. She walked for what felt like hours, her legs aching, her mind racing. Had Robert planned this? Had he expected Madison to abandon her like this? The thought made her chest tighten. Just as the first drops of rain began to fall, the distant rumble of an engine broke the silence. A battered pickup truck crested the hill behind her, its headlights cutting through the gloom. Evelyn hesitated, then stepped to the side of the road and raised her hand. The truck slowed, then stopped. The window rolled down, revealing a grizzled man in a flannel shirt, his beard streaked with gray. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice rough but kind. Evelyn forced a smile. I need to get to Briar Hollow. Do you know it?" The man's eyebrows lifted. "Briar Hollow? That's a good 20 miles from here." He studied her for a moment, her damp coat, her empty hands, then nodded toward the passenger seat. "Get in. I'm headed that way." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you," she whispered, climbing inside. The truck smelled of oil and old leather, but it was warm, and for the first time since the funeral, Evelyn felt a flicker of hope. As the truck rolled forward, the man glanced at her. "You got folks waiting for you at Briar Hollow?" Evelyn's fingers brushed the envelope in her pocket. "An old friend," she said softly. The man nodded, as if that explained everything. "Well," he said, "Isaac's a good man. You're in safe hands." Evelyn's breath caught. Isaac. How did this stranger know the name written in Robert's note? The he. Truck rumbled along the winding back roads, the rhythmic thud of tires against gravel filling the silence between Evelyn and the stranger behind the wheel. She clutched her bag tighter, her mind spinning with questions. How did this man know? Isaac? Was it coincidence, or had Robert's reach extended further than she ever realized? The rain had picked up again, drumming against the windshield in a steady, almost soothing rhythm, but Evelyn couldn't relax. Every turn took her farther from the life she knew, deeper into a world her husband had kept hidden from her. The trees grew denser, their branches weaving together like a canopy, blocking out what little light remained in the overcast sky. The driver didn't speak much, only occasionally pointing out landmarks, a collapsed barn, a rusted-out tractor, as if to assure her they were on the right path. Evelyn nodded absently, her thoughts fixed on the note in her pocket. Go to 28 Briar Hollow. Ask for Isaac. The words played in her head like a refrain, but the deeper meaning eluded her. Robert had always been meticulous, deliberate in his actions, and this was no impulsive decision. He had prepared for this moment, and that realization sent a shiver down her spine. Had he suspected Madison's betrayal for years? Or was there something else, something darker, that he had been protecting her from? The truck slowed as they approached a narrow, overgrown lane barely visible between two towering oaks, their trunks gnarled with age. "This is it," the man said, shifting gears as the truck bumped onto the uneven path. "Briar Hollow ain't much, just a few scattered farms and old-timers who like their privacy. But Isaac's place, you'll know it when you see it." Evelyn swallowed hard, her pulse quickening as the truck lurched forward, branches scraping against the sides like skeletal fingers. The lane seemed to stretch on forever, the shadows deepening with every passing minute, until finally the trees parted, revealing a weathered farmhouse nestled in a clearing. It was older than she'd imagined, its porch sagging slightly, the paint peeling in places, but there was a quiet dignity to it, a sense of resilience. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a single lantern glowed in the front window, cutting through the gathering dusk. The truck rolled to a stop, and the driver turned to her, his expression unreadable. "This is your stop, ma'am." Evelyn hesitated, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. "Thank you," she murmured, though the words felt inadequate. The man merely nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment before he shifted the truck into reverse. She stepped out, the cold air biting at her cheeks, and watched as the taillights disappeared back down the lane, leaving her standing alone, in front of the house. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke and earth. For a heartbeat, she wavered. What if this was a mistake? What if Isaac wasn't the friend Robert had promised? But then the front door creaked open, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped onto the porch, his silhouette framed by the golden light from within. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, waiting. Evelyn took a deep breath and forced her legs to carry her forward. "I'm looking for Isaac," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The man studied her for a long moment, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his worn hat. Then, slowly, he nodded. "You found him." His voice was deep, gravelly, but there was something in it, a warmth, a recognition, that made the tension in Evelyn's shoulders ease slightly. "Robert sent me," she said, and the moment the words left her lips, Isaac's expression shifted, something like sorrow and understanding passing over his face. He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Come inside, Evelyn," he said quietly. "We've got a lot to talk about." The warmth of the farmhouse enveloped Evelyn as she stepped inside, the scent of aged wood and burning cedar wrapping around her like an embrace. But despite the comfort of the space, her nerves remained taut, her mind racing with unanswered questions. Isaac moved with a quiet certainty as if he had been expecting her, as if this moment had been planned long ago, and that realization sent another ripple of unease through her. The interior was a time capsule of sorts, with worn leather armchairs, shelves lined with dusty books, and black and white photographs hanging slightly crooked on the walls, their subjects frozen in moments of laughter or solemnity. Faces she didn't recognize but who seemed to watch her all the same. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting flickering shadows across the room, and Isaac gestured for her to sit before disappearing into the adjoining kitchen, returning moments later with 2 steaming mugs of tea. Evelyn accepted hers gratefully, the heat seeping into her chilled fingers as she studied him over the rim. His face was weathered but kind, his eyes sharp with an intelligence that reminded her painfully of Robert. "You knew," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, and it wasn't a question. Isaac sighed, lowering himself into the chair opposite her, the wood creaking under his weight. "Robert and I go back longer than you might think," he said, his gaze steady. "He came to me a few months ago, told me things were complicated with Madison, that she'd been digging into finances, pressuring him about the will." Evelyn's stomach twisted. She had noticed the tension, the way Madison's visits home had become less about family and more about documents, signatures, whispered conversations that stopped the moment Evelyn entered the room. But she had chalked it up to grief, to the stress of a daughter watching her father fade. She never imagined it was something darker. Isaac leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He rewrote the will in secret because he knew she'd contest it if she found out, but that wasn't all he did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, tarnished key, sliding it across the table toward her. Evelyn's breath caught. It was identical to the one tucked inside Robert's envelope. "What is this for?" she asked, her fingers hovering over it as if it might burn her. Isaac's expression was unreadable. "The cellar," he said, "beneath the barn. Robert didn't just hide legal documents, Evelyn. He hid everything." The weight of his words settled over her, heavy and suffocating. She had spent 52 years believing she knew the man she married, his habits, his secrets, the way his voice softened when he said her name. But now, faced with this stranger in a house she'd never seen, holding a key to a lock she didn't know existed, she wondered if she had ever truly known him at all. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the air, and Evelyn tightened her grip on the mug, the heat biting into her palms. "Show me," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Isaac nodded, pushing himself to his feet. "It's time you saw what your husband left for you." The cold night air bit at Evelyn's face as she followed Isaac across the overgrown yard, the beam of his flashlight cutting a shaky path through the darkness toward the looming silhouette of the barn. The weathered structure stood like a silent sentinel, its wooden boards groaning in the wind as if protesting their intrusion. Evelyn's shoes sank slightly into the damp earth with each step, her pulse quickening as they approached the heavy double doors that hadn't been opened in years, judging by the thick spiderwebs glistening in the flashlight's glow. Isaac produced a ring of keys from his pocket, the metal jingling ominously as he sorted through them, finally selecting one that looked older than the others, its teeth worn smooth with time. The lock gave way with a reluctant screech, and the doors creaked open to reveal a cavernous space that smelled of hay and motor oil and something else, something faintly metallic that made the hairs on Evelyn's arms stand up. Isaac moved with purpose toward the back corner where an ancient tractor sat rusting, its tires flat and cracked with age, and it was only when he grabbed a crowbar leaning against the wall that Evelyn realized what she was looking at. A nearly invisible trapdoor hidden beneath layers of dirt and straw. Robert built this himself, Isaac muttered as he pried it open, the muscles in his arms straining with the effort. Back when things first started going bad with Madison. The door gave way with a groan, revealing a set of narrow wooden stairs, descending into blackness. Evelyn's breath came in shallow gasps as she peered down into the void, her mind racing with terrible possibilities. What if this was all some elaborate trick? What if she was walking into a nightmare of her husband's making? But then Isaac was moving down the stairs, his flashlight revealing rough-hewn stone walls slick with moisture, and Evelyn had no choice but to follow, her hand gripping the rickety railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. The air grew colder the deeper they went, the scent of damp earth and something faintly chemical filling her nostrils, and when they finally reached the bottom, Isaac's light fell upon a sight that made Evelyn's legs nearly give out. A massive, steel safe, the kind she'd only seen in old gangster movies, its surface gleaming dully in the dim light. It looked completely out of place in this underground chamber, like something that had been dropped here from another world. Isaac ran his fingers along the combination dial with something like reverence. "He told me you'd know the numbers," he said quietly, stepping back to give her space. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached out, her fingertips brushing the cold metal. 3 numbers floated to the surface of her mind unbidden. The date of their anniversary. The day Robert had always claimed was the luckiest of his life. The dial turned with surprising smoothness under her fingers, each click sounding impossibly loud in the confined space, and when the final number slotted into place, there was a heavy thunk as the locking mechanism disengaged. Isaac helped her pull open the massive door, its hinges protesting with an eerie whine, and what Evelyn saw inside made her gasp aloud. Neat stacks of cash bound with rubber bands, rows of safety deposit boxes, and several thick leather-bound journals, their spines cracked with age. But it was the envelope resting on top that caught her eye, her name written in Robert's familiar handwriting, the ink slightly smudged as if he'd been in a hurry when he wrote it. Her fingers shook as she tore it open, the single sheet of paper inside containing just 8 words that changed everything. "Forgive me. The fire wasn't an accident." The words blurred before Evelyn's eyes as the cellar walls seemed to press. In around her, the musty air suddenly too thick to breathe. The fire wasn't an accident. The memory rushed back with brutal clarity. The night 10 years ago when their vacation cabin had burned to the ground, the flames lighting up the sky, as they stood shivering in their pajamas, watching everything turn to ash. The investigators had called it faulty wiring, and Robert had held her while she sobbed, whispering that they were lucky to be alive. But now, this note, this confession hidden in the dark like a shameful secret, tore that truth apart. Her knees buckled, and she barely registered Isaac's strong grip keeping her upright as the flashlight clattered to the dirt floor, casting wild shadows across the safe's contents. "What else did he hide?" she whispered, her voice raw. Isaac exhaled heavily, bending to retrieve the light. "You should sit down." He guided her to an old crate near the wall, its wood splintered but sturdy. When she didn't move, he reached into the safe and pulled out one of the journals, its leather cover creaking as he opened it. The pages were filled with Robert's tight, methodical script, dates, amounts, names she didn't recognize. But it was the underlined entries that made her blood run cold. M inquired about trust funds again, suspicious of the offshore accounts. Another entry, a year later, caught her in my office, claims she was looking for stamps. Evelyn's fingers traced the words, her mind reeling. Madison had been searching for years. Isaac flipped to a dog-eared page near the back. Read this. The entry was dated just 3 months before Robert's diagnosis. Met with I today. Backup plan in place. If M tries to cut Ev out, she'll get nothing. The real will is safe. But the money, she can never know about the money. A ragged breath escaped Evelyn. What money? In answer, Isaac reached deeper into the safe and withdrew a slim metal box. The lock yielded to the same combination, and when he lifted the lid, Evelyn's pulse stuttered. Bundles of bonds, stock certificates, and a folded map with a red X marking a location in the Cayman Islands. Robert liquidated everything after the fire, Isaac said quietly. The business, the properties. Made it look like bankruptcy while moving the assets offshore. He knew Madison would come for it eventually. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. The late-night phone calls, Robert's sudden business trips, the way he'd insisted on handling all their finances alone. He hadn't been protecting their wealth. He'd been protecting her from their own daughter. A noise echoed from above, a creak of floorboards, too loud to be the old house settling. Isaac's head snapped up, his hand clamping over the flashlight to douse the light. In the sudden darkness, Evelyn heard. It, too, the unmistakable sound of a car engine outside. Madison had found them. The beam of headlights sliced through the barn's cracks like knife wounds as Evelyn froze, her breath trapped in her lungs. Isaac moved with terrifying efficiency, slamming the safe shut, shoving the journal into his waistband, and pulling Evelyn toward a narrow crevice between stone walls she hadn't noticed before. Quiet, he breathed against her ear, his calloused hands guiding her into the hidden space just as the trapdoor above groaned open. Dust rained down as footsteps thudded on the wooden stairs, accompanied by the erratic dance of flashlight beams. Evelyn pressed her back against the cold stone, her pulse roaring in her ears as Madison's voice cut through the darkness. "I know you're down here, Mother." The words dripped with false sweetness, the same tone she'd used as a child when caught. Stealing cookies before dinner. Isaac's fingers tightened around Evelyn's wrist in warning. Peering through the gap, she saw Madison's designer boots hit the cellar floor, followed by a hulking figure she recognized as Brad, Madison's ex-lawyer boyfriend who'd been disbarred for fraud. His flashlight illuminated the empty safe, and Madison's shriek of rage echoed off the walls. "They beat us here!" She kicked the metal door with a hollow clang, her perfect composure shattering. Brad swept his light across the walls, the beam grazing their hiding spot as Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut. "Doesn't matter," Brad growled. "The old lady doesn't know how to access offshore accounts. We'll find her." His phone buzzed, the screen casting a sickly glow on his face. "Damn it, the probate court just flagged the forged will. We've got maybe 12 hours before the cops come knocking." Madison spun in a slow circle, her manicured nails digging into her palms. She can't have gone far. The beam paused on the crate where Evelyn had sat minutes before. A single strand of gray hair glistened on the splintered wood. Madison smiled. A rat scuttled across the floor near their hiding place. Brad's light jerked toward the noise, blinding Evelyn for one heart-stopping second before Isaac yanked her deeper into the crevice. The ancient stones scraped her arms as the passage narrowed, the air tasting of mildew and old iron. Somewhere ahead, water dripped in a steady rhythm. "They're heading to the Caymans," Madison muttered above them. "Call the pilot. We're leaving. Tonight." The footsteps retreated up the stairs, the trapdoor slamming shut with finality. Isaac didn't move until the car engine faded into the distance. "Tunnel leads to the creek," he whispered, guiding Evelyn forward through the suffocating darkness. Robert dug it during the Cold War. Always prepared, that man. Evelyn stumbled over uneven ground, her fingers brushing something metallic. A rusted pipe, then another. The dripping grew louder until the tunnel opened into a moonlit stream, the icy water shocking her ankles as they waded toward the tree line. Isaac pulled a burner phone from his pocket. Time to make 2 calls. The first was to a Nassau number, Unexplained. Banker's voice answered in clipped British tones. The second was to 911, reporting a fugitive attempting to flee the country. Somewhere overhead, a plane's engines whined in the distance. Evelyn looked up as a sleek jet arced across the starless sky, its navigation lights blinking red like warning beacons. Madison's plane. Isaac pocketed the phone. "Let's go home, Evelyn." But she stood rooted in the creek, watching the jet until it vanished. Not with anger, not with grief, but with the quiet certainty of a woman finally free. The pre-dawn light painted the farmhouse in shades of blue as Evelyn sat at the oak kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The banker's words still echoed in her mind. "The accounts are frozen, Mrs. Hayes. Your daughter was intercepted at Nassau International." She should have felt something. Vindication. Relief. But all that remained was a hollow exhaustion, as if the last 24 hours had carved her out from the inside. Isaac shuffled through the doorway, his arms laden with more of Robert's journals. He set them down with a thud, the sound startling Evelyn from her thoughts. "Found these in the attic," he said, wiping dust from the cover of the topmost book. "Figured you'd want to see them." Evelyn hesitated before reaching for it. The leather was softer than the others, the pages yellowed with age. She flipped it open to the first entry, dated the year Madison turned 16. Etcham asked about her trust fund again today. I told her it's for college, but the way she looked at me, like she was calculating interest in her head. Evelyn says, "I'm imagining things that all teenagers are obsessed with money, but I know greed when I see it. I saw it in my father. I saw it in hers." Evelyn's breath caught. Hers. She turned the page with trembling fingers. The investigator's report came today. DNA doesn't lie. Madison isn't mine. Evelyn never knew. The clinic mixed up the samples during the fertility treatments. I only found out because of the blood type mismatch when she was 12. I thought it wouldn't matter. But now, seeing how she treats Evelyn, how she manipulates, I can't let her take everything. The words blurred. The coffee mug slipped from Evelyn's grasp, shattering on the floor. Isaac was at her side in an instant, steadying her. "Easy now." She couldn't speak. The truth was too enormous, too cruel. All those years of Robert's quiet distance from Madison, the way he'd sometimes watch her with something like sorrow. It hadn't been disappointment. It had been knowledge. A car door slammed outside. Isaac tensed, but Evelyn placed a hand on his arm. "It's over," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Through the window, she saw the police cruiser parked beside the barn, 2 officers helping a handcuffed Madison from the back seat. Even from this distance, Evelyn could see the smeared mascara, the ruined silk blouse. For the first time in her life, Madison looked small. The officers led her up the porch steps. When Madison saw Evelyn through the screen door, her face twisted. "You did this," she spat. "You turned everyone against me." Evelyn stood, meeting her daughter's, no, not her daughter, eyes. "No, Madison. You did that all by yourself." One of the officers cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hayes, we need you to confirm some details about the forged will at the station." Evelyn nodded. As they led Madison away, she noticed the way the rising sun caught the streaks of gray in her hair. Funny, she'd never noticed Madison was going gray before. Isaac squeezed her shoulder. "You okay?" Evelyn looked around the farmhouse, at Robert's journals, at the safe's contents spread across the table, at the life she'd never known existed. "I will be," she said, and for the first time she believed it. The courtroom hummed with muted whispers as Evelyn took her seat, the wooden bench cool beneath her palms. 3 months had passed since that night in the cellar, 3 months of depositions, subpoenas, and the slow unraveling of Madison's schemes. The district attorney had assured her this would be the final hearing, but Evelyn no longer trusted certainty. Too much of her life had been built on lies she'd mistaken for truth. Across the aisle, Madison sat flanked by her new attorney, her posture rigid in a tailored navy suit. The veneer of elegance couldn't mask the shadows under her eyes or the way her fingers drummed incessantly against the table. When she caught Evelyn staring, her lips curled into something too sharp to be a smile. The bailiff called the court to order. As the judge reviewed the case file, Evelyn's gaze drifted to the evidence table, to the forged will with its clumsy notary stamp, the bank records tracing Madison's embezzlement, and the investigator's report that had finally confirmed what Robert's journal suggested. Madison had known about her paternity for years. A private email exchange with Brad laid it bare. "If the old man ever finds out I'm not his, we lose everything. We need to move faster." The gavel cracked. "In light of the defendant's plea agreement," the judge intoned, "this court sentences Madison Cole to 18 months in federal prison for wire fraud and document forgery." A murmur rippled through the room. "Probation will require full restitution of embezzled funds and—" "Your Honor!" Madison surged to her feet, her composure fracturing. "The offshore accounts rightfully belong to me. That money came from my grandfather's estate." Evelyn stiffened. Grandfather. The word was a grenade lobbed into the silent courtroom. The judge peered over his glasses. "Miss Cole, your biological father's estate was settled in 2009. The assets in question were earned by Robert Hayes." Madison's face flushed crimson. "Then why did he hide them like a criminal?" A rustle came from the gallery. Isaac stood, his work boots scraping against the floor as all eyes turned to him. "Because Robert knew you'd burn through every dime chasing your next scheme," he said, his voice graveled with contempt. "Just like you burned that cabin down when he refused to give you early access to your trust." The air left Evelyn's lungs. Madison recoiled as if struck. "That was an electrical fire. The arson investigator's report says different." Isaac tossed a file onto the evidence table. "Gasoline splashed on the porch rails. Same way your real dad torched his warehouses for insurance money back in '98. Evelyn's hands flew to her mouth. The cabin's wraparound porch, Robert's pride and joy, had gone up like kindling. Madison's lawyer grabbed her arm as she lunged toward Isaac. "You lying piece of—" The gavel cracked twice. "Bailiff, restrain the defendant." As officers hauled Madison back, her scream echoed off the vaulted ceiling. "You'll regret this, Evelyn. I'm all you have left." The judge called for recess. In the hallway, Evelyn sagged against a marble pillar, the weight of decades pressing down on her. Isaac appeared with a paper cup of water. "She's wrong, you know," he said quietly. Evelyn studied the man who'd been Robert's keeper of secrets, his sun-weathered face, the scar across his knuckles from some long-ago fight, a friend who'd risked everything, a family she hadn't known existed. She touched his wrist. "I know." Somewhere down the corridor, Madison's shouts faded into the clang of a holding cell door. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Briar Hollow Farm as Evelyn sat at her newly refinished kitchen table, the scent of fresh coffee and cinnamon rolls filling the air. Outside, laughter echoed from the yard where 3 women, current residents of the second chance home she'd founded, were tending to the vegetable garden, their hands dirty but their faces lighter than when they'd arrived. It had been Isaac's idea to turn the property into a sanctuary, and Evelyn had poured every dollar of Robert's hidden funds into making it real. The irony wasn't lost on her. The fortune her husband had buried to keep from their daughter was now rebuilding lives Madison would have deemed worthless. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. The postman held out a thick envelope marked Certified Mail, Inmate Correspondence. Evelyn's name was written in Madison's precise handwriting, the loops of the letters sharper than she remembered, as if pressed into the paper with barely, contained fury. Isaac appeared in the doorway, his tool belt slung low on his hips from fixing the barn's roof. "You don't have to open that," he said quietly, wiping his hands on a rag. Evelyn traced the edges of the envelope. A year ago she might have thrown it away, but the woman she was now, the woman Robert had trusted her to become, needed to face this. She slid it open with a butter knife. Inside were 2 items, a letter and a faded photograph. The photo showed a younger Madison, no more than 8, sitting on Robert's shoulders at a county fair, cotton candy smeared across her grinning face. Evelyn's breath caught. Robert had kept this photo hidden for decades, long after Madison had grown cold toward him. The letter was brief. "Mother, they're transferring me to a halfway house next month. I could list every mistake I've made, but we'd be here all day. You won. That's all that matters. Or maybe you didn't, because I know you're sitting in that farmhouse right now, wondering if you could have loved me enough to save me. Funny, isn't it? All that money, and neither of us got what we wanted. M." Evelyn let the paper fall to the table. Isaac's calloused hand covered hers. "You did save her," he said, "by not letting her destroy you, too." Outside, the wind chimes Robert had hung, years ago, sang in the breeze. Evelyn tucked the photo into her apron pocket and stood, pulling Isaac up with her. "Come on," she said, nodding toward the garden. "Maggie's trying to grow tomatoes again, and Lord knows that girl can't tell a weed from a seedling." As they stepped onto the porch, the sunlight warm on her face, Evelyn realized something had shifted. The weight of Madison's words hadn't disappeared, but it no longer dragged her down. Some questions had no answers, some wounds left scars, and some lives, like the wildflowers now blooming along the driveway, grew best when left to find their own light.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.